Under the boundless blue sky, which seemed to guard their every step, a drama worthy of heroic poems took place. Iris, possessing a soul full of courage and selfless willingness to come to the rescue, did not hesitate to throw herself into the lake waters. Her actions were prompted by the urgent need to rescue Jess, who seemed to have disappeared into the depths of the pond after an unfortunate fall. With every second she spent underwater, Iris's breathing grew heavier and heavier, and her strength left her. There came a moment when she seemed ready to close her eyes forever, resigning herself to the inevitable, but fate had decreed otherwise. The next moment, as if through the fog of a dream, Iris found herself on the shore, where the first thing she saw were the girl's frightened but infinitely relieved eyes. The girl cried out, and every tear she shed was full of fear, the horror she had experienced, and immeasurable gratitude for the miraculous rescue. Iris, however, who had risen from the depths of the lake, felt the weight of the water, which had not yet had time to dry on her clothes, and the weight of the ordeal. In that moment, filled with emotion and warmth, Jess wrapped her arms around Iris in a gesture of endless gratitude and relief. Iris, whose heart was overflowing with love and care, began to comfort her sister, as if trying to erase all the shadows of fear that had taken refuge in her soul after the incident. However, the atmosphere changed dramatically when Haley, a girl endowed with clarity of mind and insight, entered the conversation. Her words about Iris's health sounded like a verdict that eased the hearts of everyone present. Iris had no health problems after the incident, but along with the relief came a warning from Haley, who, not without sternness, reminded Iris of the importance of foreseeing the consequences of her actions. Iris, an ordinary 13-year-old girl growing up in the goddess Hylas orphanage, faced a harsh reality on the brink of life and death. In those moments, as she fought for every breath beneath the cold waves of the lake, she was reminded of the words and lessons instilled in her at the orphanage. These memories, breaking through the darkness of fear and despair, filled her heart with new strength and determination. Imagine that the reality Iris lives in is actually hidden in the pages of a book once read to her in another life. This book is not just a story, but a crime thriller where the fates of the characters are entangled in a dark web of events leading to their inevitable death at the hands of the protagonist. And so, Iris discovers that her own fate is inextricably linked to this story, in which she was to be one of the doomed characters. The book's protagonist, Theo, is not just a fictional character that you can easily forget about and just run away from. He embodies the darkness and bleakness of the thriller, being a boy with black hair and bloodshot eyes that seem to reflect all his cruelty and ruthlessness. Theo is the one running the game of death, and his reality is intertwined with Iris's fate more closely than meets the eye, for he is also a ward of the same orphanage as she is. In this dystopian world where fates intertwine in unexpected and sometimes violent patterns, Theo was extremely cruel. The book said that he was like a ruthless avenger, ready to destroy anyone who crossed the threshold of the orphanage, the place where he was once dubbed the Devil. This label, applied without understanding or sympathy, brought dark colors to his story. Iris, however, was out of the way of these tumultuous passions. She had no idea about Theo, except that she had just remembered him from a book. That day, like so many others, she found refuge among the pages of Animals Are Beautiful, immersing herself in a world where the harmony and beauty of nature offered solace from the cruelty of the real world outside the walls of the orphanage. Evelyn, one of the residents of the orphanage, noticing Iris's enthusiasm for reading, could not hide her curiosity. She wondered what could have motivated Iris to immerse herself so passionately in these books. Iris's answer was simple, but it revealed the depth of her view of the world and the people around her. Embarrassed but confident, she shared her reflections on the fragility of the child's psyche. Iris realized how important it is to be able to find an approach to children whose souls are easily wounded and whose hearts are open to anyone who is ready to understand and support them, and to have all the knowledge about it in order to be ready for anything. After exchanging thoughts with Iris, Evelyn, puzzled and at the same time impressed by what she had heard, decided to leave her alone with her thoughts and her books. Her mind, always seeking understanding and sympathy, could not pass over Theo's story without deep reflection. She wondered what was behind his actions, the underlying reasons that might have driven him to such extreme measures. After all, every action has a reason. Every reason has a story. Iris realized that the discrimination and prejudice Theo faced because of his dark appearance could have seriously undermined his sense of security and trust in the world around him. She concluded that the misunderstandings and fear sown around his person could have been fatal in his life, turning his path into a series of misguided decisions and actions. In that moment of epiphany, Iris realized that her new knowledge and understanding of psychology could have a decisive impact on the fates of many. She felt confident that she might be the one to find the key to healing Theo's wounded soul. That afternoon, hovering among the endless corridors of the orphanage, Iris was gripped with bewilderment and excitement. She couldn't understand why finding Theo was such an insurmountable task. The shelter, filled with whispering walls and echoes of days gone by, seemed to her like a labyrinth with no way out. With each step, she became more and more convinced that Theo had vanished into thin air like a ghost, leaving behind only the shadow of his presence. It was a long time before she, inspired by a sudden insight, came to the conclusion that Theo had probably found refuge in one of the secret corners of this world, seeking shelter from persecution and resentment, seeking to find peace in solitude, away from the pain and ridicule that were so often his companions among the walls of the asylum. Finally, her persistent search succeeded when she found him in one of the abandoned buildings that lurked behind the orphanage, like an old guardian forgotten by time. The sun shining through the cracks in the walls gave the illusion of coziness, contrary to the dilapidation and neglect of the place. Iris smiled as she ran toward Theo, delighted to see him, but his reaction was far from the expected joy. Theo, like a frozen guardian of his loneliness, met her with a menacing gaze, full of distrust and warning. His eyes were threatening, as if he were ready to defend himself, protecting his little corner of the world from any intrusion. In the face of the unexpected threat and Theo's menacing stare, Iris panicked. A sudden fear gripped her heart, and unable to cope with the feeling of vulnerability, she turned around and headed for the exit. In the back of her mind, she realized that a conversation was needed between them, that the unresolved issues that remained needed to be resolved. At that moment, however, fear was stronger and she chose to flee, letting it override reason. The next day, standing in front of the abandoned building that had been the scene of their uneasy encounter yesterday, Iris gathered the strength to try again. She knew it would be difficult to just walk in and talk, since running away last night probably hadn't added to her credibility in Theo's eyes. With a shiver in her heart and hope in her soul, she took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts and emotions. This time, her solution was not so straightforward, but much more ingenious. Iris took the ball, an object so simple yet so capable of serving as a bridge between two worlds. With ease and precisely calculated movement, she rolled him inside the building and then followed him, creating the illusion of casualness. This gesture, simple but sincere, was meant to serve as a sign of peace, a way to unobtrusively enter Theo's space without arousing his resistance. Her heart raced as she waited for Theo's reaction, but this time she was ready to face her, hoping that a small, seemingly random gesture could break down the wall of distrust that had been erected between them. Iris, clothed in a halo of goodwill and hope, smilingly offered Theo a game, seeing it not only as a way to diffuse the tense situation, but also as a chance to establish a dialogue. Her offer, simple and sincere, took Theo by surprise, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, as if such a turn of events was something unimaginable to him. When Theo extended his hands toward the ball, it seemed like a bridge of understanding had begun to build. His next gesture, however, was a cold shower for Iris. With unexpected determination and precise motion, he deflated the ball, dispelling all nascent optimism and reviving shock and puzzlement in her heart. This act symbolized not only the rejection of the proposed game, but also the depth of the rift separating their worlds. For Iris, this reaction was a clear signal that the path to Theo's heart, to his true self, would prove to be much thornier and more difficult than she had anticipated. Theo's reaction, his sudden and abrupt refusal to accept a helping hand, was expressed in words full of dislike and resentment. He stood up and stated with an accusing tone that he was not a performance for entertainment, not a show meant to entertain Iris or anyone else. These words were filled with bitterness and frustration, indicating a deep-seated distrust of others and a presumably repeatedly experienced sense of being used. The situation inside the abandoned building escalated to the extreme when Iris, barely containing her fear of Theo's threats, felt someone approaching. At that moment, Theo, showing unexpected concern or perhaps a desire to protect his personal space, decisively grabbed Iris and hid her away. Tension enveloped them both, and now a crowd of children burst through the door of the building, as if the embodiment of Theo's worst fears, ready to shower him with insults and scorn. Theo, confronted with the uninvited guests, did not hesitate to resort to threats. His menacing voice, filled with promises of physical violence, caused the children to freeze in fright. Apparently, his reputation and willingness to act made his opponents seriously rethink their intentions. However, there was one among them who decided to step out from the shadows of his comrades. The leader, despite the inner trembling that he had been physically restraining, pretended to be unshaken. He, gritting his teeth, declared that Theo, whom he called the devil, should disappear, shouting that Theo had no one to help him, for Theo was a common monster. The moment the insults against Theo filled the air, Iris was seized with bewilderment. Her mind could not grasp the reason why the boy was so mercilessly censured. It was as if he was enveloped in a vortex of injustice and aggression, leaving no chance for defense. Suddenly, like a lightning bolt piercing the clouds of delusion, an epiphany came to her. Theo, contrary to what she had thought, hadn't really done anything to warrant such an attitude. All her previous thoughts of being able to cure the villain suddenly appeared to her in their true light, as a figment of her imagination, inspired by fear and prejudice. That realization hit Iris with unexpected force. She realized that her views on Theo, her dreams of healing him, were nothing more than an illusion that made her see the ordinary boy as a monster. In that moment, she realized her mistake and how deeply she had been deluded into thinking of herself as a savior, when in reality, she was no better than those guys who were baselessly accusing Theo. This realization awakened in Iris a sense of regret and a desire to seek redemption, for now she saw that the true being lies not in those who are thoughtlessly judged, but in the prejudiced view and fear of the misunderstood. Slowly, Iris began to realize that the insults to Theo may have served as nothing more than a defensive reaction from the guys. They were probably thus trying to protect themselves from the unknown that Theo represented, based on their own fears and prejudices. She realized that her original plan to change Theo to prevent some unknown future crime had been wrong. Instead of trying to fix Theo, what she really needed was to work on herself, to change her views and prejudices. In this new light, her goals also underwent a change. Now, she sought not the impossible, preventing non-existent future atrocities, but to provide support and help for the real Theo, a boy who needed understanding and friendship, not judgment. This realization filled Iris with determination and strength. With this new purpose in her heart, Iris came out of her hiding place, ready to become Theo's protector. She addressed William and his companions, stunned by their unexpected presence. Her voice, full of confidence and anger at injustice, cut through the air as she began to bravely stand up for Theo. This moment was a turning point not only for Iris, but for everyone present, as she caused them to rethink their own actions and biases, presenting a model of true courage and humanity. With a heated heart and a spark of defiance in her eyes, Iris unleashed the thunder and lightning of her words on the boys, accusing them of being nothing more than petty cowards who were incapable of opening their mouths to anyone but Theo. Her words, filled with contempt for their cowardice and group aggression, struck them to the heart. William, trying to defend his position, began to object, claiming that Iris just doesn't know the real Theo, doesn't realize who he really is. But Iris, not letting him finish, grabbed his finger with boldness and determination, as if trying to physically emphasize his every word, and angrily declared that Theo was her close friend. This confession came as a real shock to the boys. In their eyes, Iris had always seemed like an angel, a pure being who could have nothing to do with the devil they considered Theo to be. Their beliefs that good and evil could not coexist side by side were deeply shaken by this revelation. Iris, filled with determination and anger, raised her voice, unleashing a wave of indignation on those around her. Her words cut through the air like a sword, promising that she would not allow any more abuse of Theo. William, as if puzzled by this sudden eruption of courage and determination, seemed confused for a moment. His reply was no less strange. He accused Iris of having changed, of having become incomprehensible to him and his friends. With these words, he, along with his gang, hurried away from their gathering place, the dilapidated outhouse that had served as a witness to their confrontation. In this whirlwind of emotion, Iris turned her gaze to Theo. You could see the sincere remorse in her eyes. She apologized to Theo for her fear and rejection of his true self, for the wall of misunderstanding she had unwittingly erected between them. A smile, soft and inviting, lit up her face as she held out her hand to Theo, a gesture full of friendship and a willingness to start over. Theo, however, was in no hurry to accept this sign of reconciliation. He looked at Iris's outstretched hand, as if weighing his feelings and decisions. After a moment of thought, his answer was unexpected. He stated that if Iris really felt fear, it might be best for her to stay away from him. Those words sounded like a verdict, reflecting Theo's inner struggle and his desire to protect Iris, even if it meant pushing her away. As Theo turned to leave, he couldn't resist throwing a few harsh words over his shoulder at Iris. His figure receding in the shadows of the dilapidated building seemed a symbol of misunderstanding, leaving Iris in deep thought. She stared after him, pondering how it could be that a moment seemingly meant for reconciliation and a new beginning of friendship had so suddenly turned into disappointment and estrangement. The turn of events had left her perplexed, for everything was going to come to a real friendship between them. However, Iris, despite what had happened, had not lost hope and was not going to give up. Her resolve was stronger than ever. The next day, she came again to the very shelter that Theo had considered his refuge. She had brought books with her, an instrument of peace and understanding. Iris began to read aloud, as if trying to overcome the wall of silence and misunderstanding that separated them. Her voice, filled with warmth and confidence, rang through the shelter, carrying the hope of reconciliation. Theo, on his part, met her efforts with an angry and perplexed look. He was not ready to accept this gesture of reconciliation at once. His gaze was full of resistance and distrust. Apparently, he found it hard to believe that Iris's intentions were sincere after everything that had happened. But despite his initial resistance, Iris's presence and voice were slowly but surely breaking through his defenses. As dusk enveloped the city in its soft blanket, Iris made another attempt to bond with Theo, this time bringing a small but meaningful token of attention, a macaroon, to his hideout. Standing in the semi-darkness of this secluded place, she pondered aloud how nice it would be to share such a tidbit of happiness with a friend, dreaming of the moment when friendship would be rekindled between them. However, her words, filled with sincerity and hope, were met with a sharp and irritated rebuff from Theo. His threat to break her bones filled her heart with fear again, making her turn around and dash away. That night, as silence enveloped the city and most of its inhabitants had already fallen into slumber, Theo ventured out of his temporary shelter. His footsteps were quiet, almost weightless. He seemed to be seeking peace in the coolness of the night, seeking to escape from uneasy reflections and inner contradictions. However, this moment of solitude was broken by the sudden appearance of Iris, who, like fate, crossed his path again. Suddenly, she appeared out of the darkness and fell right in front of him onto the soft grass, as if symbolizing her unwavering decision not to give up her attempts to reach his heart. The moment Iris suddenly collapsed to the ground in front of Theo, filling the space between them with her presence and hope, he seemed stunned for a moment. However, his reaction was unexpected. Without showing any aggression or annoyance, he calmly walked around her, continuing his way into the night as if she was only a minor obstacle in his path. The gesture, though seemingly cool, held no overt hostility, which allowed Iris to see it as a sign that her persistence and unconventional methods were beginning to bear fruit. Her smile at that moment was full of satisfaction and hidden hope, for she regarded the absence of rudeness on his part as a quiet success of her uneasy plan to build a bridge between their disconnected souls. At dawn, when the first rays of sunlight gingerly touched the roofs of the dilapidated buildings, waking the city from its night's sleep, Iris was overcome with curiosity. Her thoughts swirled around one mystery: how Theo had been able to find and choose such an abandoned place for his hideout that seemed inaccessible and invisible to the rest of the world. Pondering whether she should follow his example and hide from everyone was suddenly interrupted by the realization that Theo was already in the building. The moment the situation began to escalate, Iris felt her heart racing in her chest. The situation demanded her utmost calmness and concentration, for she understood. Any fear shown could lead to undesirable consequences in their difficult dialogue. In an attempt to defuse the situation, Iris decided to shift the focus of the conversation to a safer topic, choosing Theo's amazing ability to find abandoned buildings that seemed to draw him in with their secrets and stories lost to time. However, all she saw in response was a deep frown on Theo's face, which seemed to be shrouded in a shadow of displeasure. His voice sounded harsh, as if echoing his inner feelings as he spoke of those who were not forced to hide and seek refuge, emphasizing the difference between their worlds. His bloodshot eyes suddenly glittered with an unnatural light, giving his gaze a predatory sharpness, as if he could see through Iris, unraveling her innermost thoughts and fears. Realizing that the situation was slipping away from her, Iris hurried to find words that could convince Theo of her sincerity. She tried to explain that she wasn't intimidated by his appearance, that she saw so much more behind it: a person with his history, his experiences, and the reasons why he was the way he was. But these words sounded too weak against the background of his distrust and skepticism, which had been reinforced by years of loneliness and struggle. Theo could hardly take her words at face value, for his life experience had taught him to be cautious and not to trust people who appeared on his path unconditionally. Iris, trying to arouse Theo's understanding and sympathy, began her speech by asserting that the world and its established views are not always fair. She emphasized that the essence of a person is deeper than it may seem at first glance, and that the real value of a person is not in how he or she looks or what others think of him or her, but in how he or she perceives himself or herself and what his or her true thoughts and actions are. She went on to describe the myths of her country, which often referred to a magnificent goddess who had saved the world from destruction. This goddess symbolized goodness, hope, and protection from evil. In the same myths, the opposite figure appeared: the devil, who sought to destroy the goddess and the whole world with her. Iris mentioned that because of these myths, people began to seek out the embodiment of these mythical beings among themselves, trying to find those who could represent good or evil in the real world. Unfortunately, Theo was among those whom society had come to unfairly associate with devilish traits. His unique characteristics, which could have been perceived as a strength or gift, instead became the cause of fear, mistrust, and rejection. Iris convinced Theo that even if the world labeled him as the devil, it didn't mean he should succumb to those expectations and repeat the mistakes for which he was being unfairly blamed. Theo, with his deep and mysterious eyes that seemed to reflect the struggle of the soul, demanded an explanation. His question about why Iris was so sure of the infidelity of conventional standards sounded like a challenge. Suddenly, the moment of tense dialogue was interrupted by a loud noise. The echoing clang of hammers cut through the silence, and the air was filled with the sounds of destruction. The boys from the shelter, led by William, armed with tools, began ruthlessly destroying Theo's shelter, which he considered his last refuge in this indifferent world. Their actions were determined to exterminate what they considered to be the embodiment of evil. Iris, seized with anger and resentment at such recklessness, rushed to her defense. She sprang from her hiding place to confront William face to face. Her words were full of indignation and criticism of his actions. But William, for his part, shouted back, claiming that their mission to destroy the asylum, which he called the Devil's Hideout, was bound to be accomplished. He was convinced that their actions were doing good by eradicating what was seen as a source of evil. In a moment of deepest despair, as the sky above Iris was darkened by falling debris, her life seemed on the line for imminent disaster. It was then, like a bolt of lightning, that Theo burst into her reality, becoming a shield between her and the flying threat. His sudden appearance and decisive actions seemed to freeze time, leaving the audience of the scene bewildered by the unexpectedness of what was happening. Theo, covered in blood like the devil incarnate, took the full force of the blow, protecting Iris with his body. His figure, lying on top of her, became a human shield against the merciless debris. When he rose, his eyes met Iris's anxiety-filled eyes. Words of comfort escaped his lips, aimed at soothing the girl's agitated heart while he endeavored to assure her of his well-being. Iris, overwhelmed by the sudden storm of emotions, could barely hold back the tears that came to her eyes. Her hand gently touched his cheek, as if trying to convey care and support through this gesture, despite her own anxiety. Theo, despite his visible suffering, remained unperturbed, as if his soul and body were protected by an invisible barrier. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed with the arrival of a new turn. A scream cutting through the air caught the attention of everyone present. In this chaos that suddenly engulfed the space around him, a figure appeared whose presence instantly attracted the attention of everyone present. The director of the shelter, her voice echoing throughout the neighborhood, tried to restore order amidst the reigning disorder, shouting in an attempt to solve the mystery of the events that had occurred. Iris, trying to recover from the shock she had experienced, found the strength to say something, but the physical pain and emotional exhaustion had done their work. Her words were lost on the way to her voice. Theo, watching her suffering, experienced an inner impulse to support her in a more tangible way, but his uncertainty about his own feelings and readiness for such a gesture made him stop. Instead, he chose words of comfort, silently urging Iris not to give up in the face of tears. The situation escalated when Iris, rebelling against the injustice, raised her voice in defense of herself and Theo to the principal. Her outcry about the injustice of the shelter's management became a powerful expression of her unyielding will and desire to defend justice. This moment was the breaking point when Iris and Theo, along with those involved in the destruction of the building, found themselves facing authority in the principal's office. She took her frustration out on Iris and Theo, accusing them of breaking the established rules by entering a forbidden building and getting into a fight. The principal's words sounded like a sentence, but Iris, whose heart was filled with indignation, could not let it go unchallenged. She strongly suggested that William was the one who had initiated the conflict, trying to protect Theo from unfair accusations. However, at this critical moment, Theo made an unexpected gesture, lightly touching Iris's arm, as if trying to tell her that some battles were better left unresolved. Iris, picking up on that quiet signal, realized that Theo preferred not to inflame the situation further and decided to back off. It was a moment of understanding between two souls, when words become superfluous and looks and gestures say so much more. Shortly thereafter, the principal, wanting to restore order, ordered in a commanding voice that the hands be lowered, symbolizing the end of the conflict. She then, walking up to Iris, began whispering in her ear, inquiring as to the reasons for this behavior, seeking to understand what was causing the girl to act so uncompromisingly. Iris did not hesitate to answer that her actions came from a conviction to do what felt right to her. The sudden question from the principal cut into the silence of the room like lightning cutting through the sky. With distrust and suspicion in her eyes, she turned to Iris, suggesting as if Theo was using blackmail to keep the girl by his side. She couldn't believe that a true friendship could exist between Iris and Theo, whom she called the devil. This moment was a test for everyone present, especially when Theo, stunned by the accusation, couldn't stand it and abruptly snapped out of his seat. Iris, whose heart was filled with anxiety and fear for her friend, tried to stop him. Her voice, filled with despair, grew louder and louder until Theo reached the threshold of leaving the office. But instead of giving in to her entreaties, Theo continued on his way to the exit, leaving behind echoes of unresolved questions and resentments. At this moment, the principal, deciding to intervene, physically stopped Iris, arguing that the girl should not get involved with a rude man like Theo. these words only increased the pain in Iris's heart, turning her frustration into rage. The tears furrowing her face were a testament to her pain and despair. In a burst of emotion, Iris shouted out that the principal was a disgusting adult for her unfair and cruel treatment of the children. Iris, whose face was playing with shades of crimson, looked toward William and his companions. With dignity and firmness in her voice, she expressed her opinion of their actions, emphasizing that despite their childish mistakes, the real blame lies with the adult who, forgetting her role and responsibility, thoughtlessly inflicted deep pain on the child. These words resounding through the room caused the principal to be in a complete stupor, as if it was the first time she had ever faced such an open challenge and truth. Without waiting for an answer, Iris, whose soul was filled with a mixture of bitterness and determination, turned around and walked out of the office. Before she left, she reminded everyone present of Theo's act of not only protecting her, but saving her life today. Leaving the office, Iris made her way to the medical room where her teacher, Haley, was waiting for her. Upon meeting Iris, Haley immediately jumped up from her seat, anxiously questioning the girl about who she had helped and how she had gotten her injuries. With confidence and calmness in her voice, she clarified that the blood staining her hands was not her own. Her next words were filled with seriousness and insistence. She needed a first aid kit for a friend who was in trouble. Haley, always ready to help, was quick to offer her support by offering to fix up Iris's friend on her own. Iris, realizing the uniqueness and complexity of the situation, yelled that Haley couldn't help him. There was a note of apology in her words for her sudden rudeness, explaining that while she could not reveal the identity of her friend, her request for help was extremely important and could not be delayed. Iris found herself in a state of deep need and despair. Her voice, tinged with pleading notes, broke the awkwardness as she asked Haley again for the first aid kit. Haley, whose face reflected a moment of reflection and empathy, sighed deeply before giving in. As she handed the first aid kit to Iris, she didn't miss the opportunity to emphasize the seriousness of the moment, warning that the wounds Iris faced could be far more severe than she realized. Haley insisted that after the initial treatment of the wounds, Iris bring the injured man to her, making it clear that her concern went beyond simply providing medication. The next moment brought an unexpected turn in their conversation. Haley, as if wanting to distract Iris from her current anxiety, asked a question concerning a place that might be associated with a refuge in her mind. That question seemed to stop time for Iris for a moment, making her think about what exactly safety meant to her. Haley, sharing her vision of the perfect refuge, suggested the South Hill as a place with all the qualities of a true refuge. That sentence, suddenly thrown into the space of their dialogue, made Iris feel a wave of gratitude. Her reaction was immediate and sincere. She thanked Haley, her voice trembling with gratitude and mixed feelings. Without wasting a second, Iris, armed with her first aid kit and a newfound sense of hope, headed for the exit. Iris, gripped by anxiety and worry, made her way through the dense thickets of the night forest. Her thoughts were completely preoccupied with Theo's condition, especially after the disturbing words voiced by the principal. At the same time, Iris, on this night hike, burdened by her musings on the motives that lead people to wish evil upon Theo, could find no explanation for this enigma of human cruelty. Her path was abruptly interrupted when Iris stopped short. Her gaze, full of amazement and horror, was fixed on the ground before her. There, on the forest floor, a bloody path gaped like a grim guidebook leading them into the heart of darkness. This eerie trail ran in the direction of a cave gaping mysteriously amidst the forest gloom. Without a second's hesitation, Iris, gripped by a mixture of fear and determination, headed for the cave entrance. Her steps were firm and determined, driven by the sole desire to find Theo and keep him safe. Inside the cave, among its cold, echo-filled walls, she found him. Theo sat alone, curled up in a cuddle, his knees pressed to his chest. His shoulders shook with quiet sobs, and the tears rolling down his cheeks reflected the depth of his pain and loneliness. When their gazes met, Theo looked at Iris with suspicion and distrust, as if from beneath his frown, a sense of betrayal and loneliness in his eyes. Iris, catching that fleeting glance, felt a deep pain. It was clear to her that Theo had spent a good deal of time here, in a secluded corner of the cave, immersed in his fears and worries, exhausted from the tears that poured out when he was all alone. Approaching Theo slowly, feeling the gravity of the moment with each step, Iris found the strength to express her sincere feelings. She didn't comfort him with empty words about how all of society's standards and expectations were wrong, because her heart said otherwise. Instead, she opened her soul, confessing that her faith was not in what society dictated, but in Theo, in his strength, kindness, and extraordinary uniqueness. Her words sounded like a beacon of hope in the darkness, lighting the way to understanding and sincerity. Theo was amazed. It seemed impossible to him that anyone could believe in him so strongly, especially in such a moment of despair and self-doubt, and his astonishment was so great that for a moment he was at a loss for words. But then, as a confirmation of her words, Iris gave Theo the brightest and most sincere smile, which became for him the embodiment of warmth and security. That smile was like a sign that despite the adversity, they could overcome it together. Her confidence and faith in Theo weren't just words, they became a bridge connecting two lonely hearts in this moment of sincere human interaction. The moment Iris suggested with confidence and calmness in her voice that the real devil would never come to the aid of others, unlike Theo, the air around her seemed filled with tension. Theo, for his part, struggled to choose his words, trying to keep Iris from himself. His warning that further contact with him could only bring her pain, and the risk of his own curse sounded like a desperate attempt at self-defense. In this confession, Iris caught the deep pain of Theo, who seemed to be beginning to take on the image of the devil that those around him had dubbed him. His words, full of fear and self-recrimination, reflected the internal struggle and anguish he experienced as he struggled with his own identity. However, when Theo exclaimed with force and desperation that he was not the devil, his voice filled the cave for a moment, and the tears streaming down his cheeks were an expression of his sincere feelings so long hidden within. That moment was the turning point when words of fear and alienation turned into tears of release from inner demons. Iris, whose heart was full of sympathy and unwavering faith in Theo, could not stay away. She reached out her arms to him and embraced him, creating an atmosphere of warmth and protection around them. Her embrace became a symbol of unwavering support and faith in him, despite all the trials and accusations. "I'll always trust you, no matter what happens." Iris's words sounded like a vow, a promise to stand by Theo's side, no matter the darkness that might surround them. Iris, with dexterity and skill, completed Theo's first aid process, applying the last band-aid to his wounds. The whole process, filled with care and attention, left Theo in a state where his usual enthusiasm seemed to fade away and his body was racked with a sense of fatigue and gratitude for the help he had received. He stood there wrapped in bandages, like a mummy resurrected in a new guise of care and attention. But then, as the cherry on the cake of this act of caring, Iris shared with Theo that he had one more little challenge to complete his recovery. Her smile was filled with warmth and mystery, as if she knew the secret ingredients of the magic elixir of health. She walked over to Theo, gently took his head in her hands, and, like a flower bowing to the sun at dawn, slowly approached his face. At that moment, as her lips touched his forehead in a gentle, healing kiss, an air of magic and care wafted through the room. Theo, caught off guard by this gesture, like a little boy who felt the touch of a light spring breeze for the first time, blushed instantly. His reaction was instantaneous and full of embarrassment. He bounced away from Iris, trying to process this unexpected act of affection, unable to understand why she had done it. Iris, however, with a confident and secret smile, only remarked that now there would be a bit of a wait. Her words hung in the air, filling the space with the expectation of something magical that only time would reveal. As soon as Iris finished her mysterious actions, something incredible happened to Theo. His body suddenly lit up with bright yellow sparks, creating an aura around him filled with light and energy. In that magical moment, Theo felt an invisible force envelop him, bringing relief and healing. His wounds, as if obeying some unknown order, began to heal rapidly, leaving behind only a sense of wonder and deep gratitude. He felt the heaviness and pain go away, giving way to lightness and new strength. Iris, observing this miracle, explained that everything that was happening was the result of her magic, which lurked in that very healing kiss. Her words sounded like music to Theo, confirming that the world was full of wonders available only to those who believed in magic. With reassurance and care in her voice, Iris offered to return to the shelter, a place where Theo could receive further help and care. She reminded herself of Haley, who would need to have his wounds examined as well, emphasizing that while magic played a part, it was important not to forget the care from professionals. Theo, still stunned by what had happened, but now filled with new hope and gratitude, looked at Iris. His gaze was full of deep respect and gratitude for this girl who had not just healed his wounds, but had opened him to a world where magic intertwined with reality, creating incredible stories of healing. With some uncertainty, but also a desire to go forward, he held out his hand to her, ready to follow her back to the shelter, to a place where a new stage of recovery and perhaps new adventures awaited him. As the silence between Iris and Theo seemed filled with unspoken words, Theo, suddenly puzzled, questioned the reason for Iris's unusual look at him. Iris's answer was as unexpected as the whole previous course of events. With a light and playful smile, she admitted that she liked the way Theo had expressed his gratitude and announced that they were now friends. It was to her an obvious and natural extension of their meeting, a moment when two souls find common ground in the most unexpected circumstances. Theo, however, could not share her optimism. Skepticism and insecurity made him turn away, as if trying to shelter himself from the possibility of new intimacy. His words, determined to push away the possibility of friendship, sounded like a defensive reaction to the hand of help and friendship offered. "No one will want to be friends with him," he declared, as if the deep pain of past disappointments were hidden in those words. Iris, for her part, did not take his words as a final verdict. Her indignation was more of a playful challenge than real indignation. She couldn't bear the thought that Theo didn't consider her his friend, because to her, friendship was a choice of the heart that didn't require permission or invitation. With the stubbornness of a true friend, she insisted on the answer to how she could be a friend to Theo, despite his attempts to dismiss her insistence. Iris declared with unyielding determination that she was not going anywhere until she had an answer to her question. Theo, overcome with embarrassment, hurried to leave the scene, but his path was blocked by Iris. With unwavering authority, she demanded that he stop and, without giving him a chance to object, followed him. Her insistence left no choice, and Theo, though reluctant, agreed to follow her. Their footsteps soon brought them into a space filled with the sterile air of a medical office, where Haley, whose eyes expressed both surprise and professional interest, was already waiting for them. She talked nonstop about how amazingly fast Theo's wounds were healing despite their considerable depth. The revelation alarmed Iris, who couldn't hide her excitement behind her usually unruffled face. Haley, noticing this, hurried to reassure them both, assuring them that Theo would be fine. Nevertheless, Theo could not rid himself of the feeling of a weight on his shoulders. His gaze was full of frustration. Iris, watching him closely, realized the depth of his distress. It was clear to her that Theo had a hard time with his uniqueness, especially when it set him apart from the crowd in a way that even his ability to regenerate could confirm the rumors surrounding his name like the seal of the devil. In light of this realization, Iris made the decision to act. Iris loudly proclaimed that Theo's healing was the result of her magic, thus seeking not only to protect him from further ridicule and misunderstanding, but also to instill in his heart the assurance that he was not alone in his ordeal. With a slight smile on her face that could melt even the iciest heart, Iris, not missing the opportunity to add some humor to the situation, unobtrusively hinted at gratitude. Theo, who was in the midst of this relaxed atmosphere, could not hide his embarrassment. His response was more reflective than thoughtful. He had asked Iris not to spread absurd ideas, but his voice betrayed excitement and uncertainty. After a while, Iris and Theo set off together to find a vacant seat in the dining room, a task that proved to be difficult. Their appearance together elicited many surprised and even judgmental looks from those around them. Whispers and bewilderment filled the air. How could Iris, so bright and sociable, choose the company of someone who had been thoughtlessly dubbed the devil's spawn? Theo, for his part, had mixed feelings. On the one hand, he hated to see their company breed gossip and misunderstanding. On the other, he was irritated by Iris's insistence on eating in the dining room, a place where their every move was under scrutiny. Iris, however, did not let this circumstance break her resolve. She firmly told Theo that he must learn to ignore unkind looks and words, to stand above prejudiced opinions. Theo, for his part, couldn't help but express his indignation, emphasizing that Iris and he were in completely different positions. In his eyes, the world was unfair, for Iris was accepted by everyone, her company was welcome, while he, Theo, remained in exile, doomed to misunderstanding and rejection. Iris, with a slight smile on her lips, asked Theo a question that seemed important to her. She wondered if they could consider themselves friends. Theo, finding himself suddenly embarrassed, confessed with some embarrassment that, in his opinion, they could not be called friends. But Iris, not discouraged in the face of his answer, declared with enthusiasm that, in spite of his words, they were sure to become friends. This answer of hers made Theo think that Iris was behaving rather strangely, not fitting into his ideas of normal relationships between people. Iris, hearing his words, was suddenly overcome with panic. She began to worry that her inner world had changed under the influence of memories of her past life, which could affect her character and behavior. Thoughts began to swirl in her head that this change might push Theo away from her, and there was no way she could afford to lose the possibility of friendship with him. Theo, for his part, continued to ponder the strangeness of Iris's desire to socialize with him specifically, which seemed inexplicable and even a little naive to him. He couldn't understand why she was so insistent on friendship, which only added to his puzzlement. In an attempt to break this tense atmosphere and interrupt the chain of his doubts, Iris, acting spontaneously and a little eccentrically, put the sausage directly into his mouth. After a brief but tense interaction, Iris decided to have a change of scenery and suggested that Theo unwind by playing ball. With that sentence, she headed off to put the tray of food away, chastising herself in passing for allowing herself to relax and forget for a moment. Thoughts swirled in her mind that she might be acting too carelessly, not considering the possible consequences of her actions. But the calm was shattered by shouts from outside. The voices of terror reported that the devil had appeared in the street. Iris's heart sank with fear and worry for Theo. She immediately thought that Theo was in the midst of trouble again, and that made her heart beat even faster. Iris was gripped with panic, imagining what troubles might be waiting for him on the street. Outside, under the gazes of the surrounding children, Theo, as if he were the devil incarnate himself, grabbed one of the boys by the pecs, threatening him with violence. The moment was tense, and there was a sense of an impending storm in the air. The children looked on with undisguised horror and curiosity, not knowing how it would end. At this critical moment, when the tension had reached its climax, the boy, trapped in his own mistakes, looked at Theo with undisguised fear in his eyes. Theo, whose eyes sparkled with rage, was about to strike, but at that moment Iris intervened, trying to prevent violence. She grabbed Theo's arm, trying to stop him. At the same time, the boy, realizing the proximity of the inevitable, screamed, admitting his guilt and begging for mercy. Iris quickly took advantage of the situation to convince Theo that the guy had already admitted his mistake, and that violence was not the answer. She spoke to Theo, emphasizing that further violence was not only pointless but unacceptable. Theo glared menacingly at Iris as if weighing her words, and after a moment that seemed like an eternity, relented and let the boy go, allowing him to disappear from sight. The boy, unable to believe his good fortune, hurriedly ran away, trying to get as far away from the place of his recent fear as possible. Iris, sighing in relief, but still feeling the weight of what had happened, took Theo by the palm of her hand and dragged him behind her, trying to pull him away from the place where the tragedy had almost played out. Her act was not only an attempt to physically distance herself from what was happening, but also a symbolic gesture indicating a desire to keep Theo from further rash actions that could have unpredictable and possibly irreversible consequences. Running through the gentle rays of sunlight that playfully broke through the lush foliage of the trees, Iris and Theo, like characters from an ancient legend, left behind them a dusty path in this verdant sanctuary. The world around them seemed to come alive. In every rustle, in every bright ray of sunlight, there was a mystery hidden. But in the hearts of our heroes at this moment were quite different concerns. A whirlwind of emotions swirled in Iris's head as she finally decided to talk about something that had been on her mind for a long time. With excitement in her voice, she asked Theo why he'd been so harsh with that guy, grabbing him by the scruff of the neck. Theo, whose facial features instantly darkened with a shadow of anger like steel tempered in fire, frankly admitted that his act was caused by that guy's rude words to Iris. The fire of a defender flashed in his eyes, ready to stand up for himself even in the face of the most imminent threat. Iris, catching more than just concern for her well-being in his words, felt a wave of embarrassment and gratitude at the same time. Her heart filled with warmth at the thought that Theo, despite his constant assertions that they were not friends, had shown such care and protection. At that moment, Iris, overwhelmed with emotion, found no better way to express her gratitude and acknowledgement of his deed than to hug Theo. Her embrace was strong and sincere, as if it could erase all the boundaries between them, all the spoken and unspoken words. She whispered words of gratitude, confessing her naivety and lack of understanding of how deeply Theo cared for her. Theo, however, suddenly feeling the weight of her touch on him, could not hide his embarrassment. This moment came as a surprise to him, and as if protecting himself from too close emotional contact, he gently but firmly pulled Iris away. After the emotions had subsided a bit, and the forest around them continued its eternal song, filled with the whispering of leaves and the distant sounds of animals, Iris found the strength to turn to Theo again. Her voice sounded more peaceful this time, and there was a sense of gratitude in it. She expressed her appreciation for his undoubted care and protection, but could not overlook his tendency to be harsh in his treatment of others. With the kind of delicacy and subtlety that could only come from a sincere heart, Iris asked Theo to rethink his methods, pointing out the possibility of a different path that did not involve violence. Theo, catching the note of concern in her words, couldn't hide his reaction. For a moment, his face reflected a mix of feelings, a mixture of surprise and slight resentment. However, Eris, noticing this change in his expression, hastened to add that she did not consider him a bad person. She made it clear that her support for Theo was unwavering, that she was unreservedly on his side, despite all the difficulties. Theo, in turn, asked if Eris really wanted to see him different. Good, in her sense of the word. Eris did not hesitate to answer that Theo was already a good man in her eyes. Her concern was not so much for his moral qualities, but for the possibility that his actions, sometimes too impulsive and abrupt, might lead to misunderstandings with those around him, which in turn might hurt him. When Theo embarrassedly accepted Iris's words, his reaction caused a wave of warmth in her heart. A smile lit up her face, a genuine and infectious smile that was impossible to resist. Even Theo, usually so reserved and serious, could not resist this atmosphere of joy and lightness. The corners of his lips lifted in an answering smile, too, and the moment was filled with something especially warm and light. Iris, overwhelmed with hope that Theo would no longer see himself in a negative light, took his hand. The gesture was full of symbolism. She wanted to show him that he was not alone. But when Theo responded to her gesture with his smile, it was unexpectedly creepy, which instantly made Iris feel a surge of fear. In that moment, she realized that the smile Theo thought was friendly could actually be intimidating to those around him, and that he would have to learn the art of expressing his feelings in a sincere and warm manner. The children had fun playing with the ball. Their laughter and shouts of joy filled the space, creating an atmosphere of carefree and happiness. Theo, standing a little to the side, watched the scene. His face lit up with a smile again, but despite his attempts to be friendly, the smile looked rather unusual and even frightening to those who could see it. The moment Iris gently suggested that Theo relax his gaze a little in an attempt to help him look more friendly, the atmosphere between them was filled with a slight tension. Theo, feeling uncomfortable with this advice, tried to follow it, but the result was not at all what he had hoped for. His attempt at a smile only made his face look even more unnatural and, to Iris, even a little frightening. This suddenly increased the tension between them, making Iris feel even more unsure of how exactly she should react. Theo, in turn, noticing her growing anxiety, felt disappointed. He realized that his efforts had not only failed to improve the situation, but perhaps even made it worse. At that moment, Iris, thinking about what was going on, came to the conclusion that the problem might lie not so much in his facial expressions, but in his appearance, namely in Theo's hair, which gave him an unusual and even a little sinister appearance. Iris's gaze remained fixed on Theo as she considered possible ways to help him. Trying to find a solution, she approached Theo with a question of trust, wondering if he was willing to rely on her judgment and allow her to make changes that might help him. Theo, sensing the genuine concern in her voice and the desire to help, nodded in agreement without hesitation. Iris, feeling relieved at his confidence, gently took his hand and led the way, ready to overcome the obstacles together to improve his appearance and well-being. Iris, with enthusiasm and confidence in her voice, began to prepare Theo for his upcoming haircut. She explained to him that changing his hairstyle, specifically shortening his bangs, could significantly transform his appearance, making him look less stern and more welcoming. Theo, absorbing her every word, could not hide his anxiety and dared to ask Iris if she had any experience of cutting anyone's hair before this moment. There was silence in response to his question, which only increased his doubts. Suddenly gripped by fear of the unknown and the possible consequences of her experimentation with his hair, Theo stood up abruptly and rushed to the nearest hiding place, hoping to slip away from the unwanted hairstyle. Iris, however, caught up with him in a flash and, with unexpected agility and strength, threw him to the ground. Lying on the ground under Iris's weight, Theo tried to break free, but to no avail. Iris, undaunted, confidently told Theo that her lack of experience didn't mean she couldn't have a hidden talent for hairdressing. Her words were full of determination and self-confidence, which visibly confused Theo. He tried to convince her that this approach could be very dangerous and unpredictable, but Iris was unwavering in her determination to change his hair for the better. She was firmly convinced that any result of their combined endeavors would prove far better than the current state of his hair, even if it meant overcoming some trials along the way. After much thought and hesitation, Theo finally accepted the inevitable and gave his consent for Iris to have the haircut. As she carefully and aptly interacted with his hair, time seemed to slow its run. Finally completing her creation, Iris stepped back to get a better look at the result of her efforts. She sighed with relief and satisfaction as she looked at Theo's freshly done hair, which glistened with newness and transformed his appearance. Theo, feeling her gaze on him, cautiously looked up, and his face expressed surprise at the reflection he saw. Iris, blazing with delight and pride in her work, blushed involuntarily, noticing how much the new look suited Theo. He, for his part, felt a little strange to be faced with such a drastic change in his appearance. To be sure of how he felt, Theo was asked to look in a mirror, which a satisfied Iris held out to him. While Iris pondered her possible talent for hairdressing with pride and considerable smugness, Theo regarded his reflection with bewilderment and slight hesitation. A look of surprise and mixed feelings reverberated in his eyes. Iris was alarmed at his reaction, for she feared that he might not like the result of her efforts. Theo, noticing her concern, hastened to explain that the change in his appearance had made his red eyes even more expressive and prominent, which added a new, unexpected depth to his image. Iris, realizing her mistake, was suddenly panic-stricken as she realized that she couldn't fix it because her hair couldn't be glued back on. An uneasiness flared in her heart as she remembered that it was Theo's unusual eye color that sometimes caused unwanted associations with others, leading to him being dubbed none other than the devil. In an effort to remedy the situation, she quickly snatched the mirror from his hands and, trying to hide her excitement, hastened to assure him that she found his black hair and red eyes irresistibly beautiful, comparing them to gems. The smile playing on her lips was so enchanting that Theo was momentarily speechless, consumed by the sudden feeling of warmth and acceptance. In a silence broken only by their own heartbeats, they exchanged glances full of unspoken words and emotions. In that moment, the world seemed to stop for them as two hearts spoke far more than words could express. And then, Theo finally smiled, and his smile was so genuine and bright that all the previous awkwardness and uncertainty faded away. That smile reflected everything: self-acceptance, gratitude for Iris's support, and perhaps the beginning of something new and beautiful between them. Suddenly enveloped in an aura of amazement, Iris couldn't take her eyes off Theo, whose smile instantly lit up the space between them. But as soon as she expressed her surprise, Theo, as if caught by the unexpected display of joy, immediately extinguished his amusement, returning to his usual expression. Iris, undeterred, admired his smile, emphasizing her beauty and spontaneity. She proudly added that now that Theo had such a wonderful smile, he only needed to find friends to share that joy with. Theo, however, not sharing her enthusiasm, bluntly stated that he didn't need friends. This statement left Iris at a loss. She couldn't understand how, after all their efforts together and the hardships they had overcome, Theo could so easily give up the opportunity to make friends. She tried to convince him that friendship was something valuable and important, that friends could protect in times of need and support when it was most needed. But Theo did not hesitate to reply that he already had Iris, and that was the most important thing for him. These words made Iris's heart beat faster. She was overwhelmed with feelings, a mixture of awe and deep excitement at the realization of how much she meant to Theo. This moment was a vivid testament to the immeasurable value of their bond, proof to her that sometimes one person in your life can be enough to make you feel happy and whole. Iris, feeling Theo's eyes on her, could not hide her embarrassment. Her words, spoken in a half-whisper, seemed to accuse him of making her worry on purpose. Theo, for his part, didn't hold back his emotions and broke the tension with a burst of laughter, his joy spilling contagiously around him. After a short fit of laughter, wiping away the tears of joy and regaining his seriousness, he hastened to assure Iris of his sincerity. His words, heartfelt and clear, left no room for doubt. No one in this world was more important to him than Iris. The decision to cut her hair, which might have seemed like a small thing, was made purely out of a desire to please her, to follow her preferences. Theo wasn't looking for recognition or approval from others. His only desire was to see Iris happy. It was his way of expressing his deep affection and willingness to make any sacrifice for her smile. His sincerity and openness in that moment shattered any barriers of doubt, confirming that their bond was much stronger than just friendship. Theo's gesture, though seemingly insignificant at first glance, was filled with deep meaning and emphasized his willingness to do whatever it took to see Iris happy and joyful. When Iris tried to lead Theo along, he, sensing her intention, stood up resolutely and headed off on his own, leading their little journey. There was a fine line in that gesture between wanting to support the initiative and recognizing the importance of Iris's advice. Her attentiveness allowed her to notice Theo's latent awkwardness as he spoke, words packed with deep meaning and feeling. Outside, under the rustling of leaves and the unseen gaze of passers-by, Iris began her gentle but insistent lesson in friendliness. Her words were full of care and understanding as she explained to Theo that the key to people's hearts was their language, their words. Pointing out the need to set aside talk of dark jokes and murder, even if they weren't said in earnest, Iris sought to teach Theo that the impression we make on others is made up of our words. However, Theo, standing on the threshold of this new world of interpersonal relationships, faced a perplexing situation. How to respond to provocation? What to do if words cannot protect? In response to his questions, Iris offered perhaps the most controversial advice of all: use force when necessary. Suddenly stopping half-heartedly, Iris tried to lighten the mood, noting that her words were nothing more than a joke. She emphasized that there are many methods of expressing dissent or discontent that do not require resorting to violent measures. This moment showed her belief that any conflicts can be resolved without descending into rudeness or violence. When Theo, perhaps with a slight sneer or genuine interest, asked her for a specific example of such a method, Iris was lost for a moment. Her inability to instantly offer an alternative was an occasion for Theo to criticize her qualifications, particularly her right to teach him or tell him how to act. This exchange made Iris feel uncomfortable. She tried to reassert her position by insisting that the use of force was not the best way out of the situation. That comment of hers caused Theo to take special notice, his gaze becoming so penetrating that Iris couldn't stand it. At the peak of her excitement, and perhaps feeling that her words were not being properly understood, she exclaimed in desperation, urging him to stop. Iris, seized by a flash of anger, began to draw vigorously on the ground with her stick, as if trying to express her determination through this primitive gesture. there was something deeper than annoyance in her action. It was the moment she was about to make a final, unwavering statement to Theo. With confidence and undisguised seriousness in her voice, she proclaimed that Theo needed to find kindness, to learn to be kind not selectively, but to everyone without exception. These words carried not just a call for change, but a demand for a radical revision of his attitude to the world around him. It wasn't long before Iris, inspired by her recent surge of emotion and determination, gathered all the children of the orphanage outside. She wanted to draw their attention to something important, an upcoming event that she thought might be something meaningful to them. Coughing to attract attention, she announced with mystery in her voice that she was going to introduce them to a certain character. This character, she said, was little known among those in attendance, adding a sense of intrigue and anticipation. However, she deliberately left his identity a mystery without revealing his name, which only heightened interest and curiosity among the gathered children. Continuing her speech to the intrigued children, Iris shared more in-depth details about her mysterious friend. She said that there were a lot of rumors surrounding him that made his life pretty hard. These words touched the hearts of the children, for each of them knew what it was like to face misunderstanding and judgment. Iris continued, saying that because of these rumors, he was constantly being harassed, and he was so isolated that he didn't even play ball with anyone. This revelation made the children even more sympathetic to the unknown, and they were ready to open their hearts and offer their friendship. Concluding her heartfelt plea, Iris asked the children to play with her friend to break down the wall of loneliness surrounding him. The children's response was unanimous. They agreed, showing their willingness to accept and support someone in need of friendship. In gratitude for their kindness and willingness to help, Iris handed out small chocolates to all the children, giving them not only the sweet taste of a treat, but also the warmth of her appreciation. With a sly smile that flashed across her face, Iris announced that it was time to finally introduce her mysterious friend. The moment was full of anticipation, for the children had already felt a connection to him without even knowing who he was. When Iris spoke Theo's name, summoning him from behind the shelter of a tree, there was tension in the air. The children gathered around froze in anticipation, and when Theo appeared in front of them, their first reaction was consternation. However, when Theo turned to them with a nice smile and a friendly greeting, the children were amazed. They hadn't expected this turnaround, for the rumors they had heard painted a very different picture. Iris wasted no time in beginning to tell of Theo's kindness, eager to dispel any fears and prejudices the children might have accumulated. She spoke confidently of his good qualities, but her speech was suddenly interrupted by a shout from one of the boys, who exclaimed that Theo was the devil. This accusation could have undermined Iris's best efforts, but she quickly parried it by stating that the devil could not possess beauty and a smile like Theo's. The children, however, were not deterred, pointing to Theo's red eyes as proof of his demonic nature. This moment was a test for all present, for such external features are often a cause for fear and misunderstanding. Iris faced the challenge of not only supporting Theo, but also helping children overcome their biases by teaching them to look beyond the surface of external attributes and appreciate the inner qualities of a person. Iris, glancing at Theo, slowly approached him. Suddenly, with a force that made the air around her shake, she exclaimed, turning to him, "Theo, give me your hand." In response to her command, Theo obediently held out his hand like a trained dog. Then, with the same confidence and calmness that could subdue even the wildest winds, Iris asked for the other hand. Without the slightest hesitation, Theo complied with this instruction as well. Afterward, Iris stroked him affectionately, as if rewarding him for his obedience, and called him a good boy with warmth in her voice. Then she turned to the children around them, and with a force that came from the depths of her soul, announced, "The devil will never be so obedient, hence Theo is an ordinary man." At this moment, one of the boys, unable to contain his delight and amazement, cried out that Iris had tamed the devil himself. These words, like sparks, ignited a fire of curiosity and admiration in the children's eyes. They began to ask questions, wanting to know how Iris had achieved the feat of taming a creature that many considered unruly and elusive. Theo, watching the events unfold, bitterly recognized that their intended plan had not yielded the expected results. Instead of dispelling fears and prejudices, Iris's words and actions only added fuel to the fire. The rumors, like an out-of-control wildfire, spread throughout the orphanage, engulfing more and more minds. The children, meeting Iris, warned her cautiously that taming the devil was a risky business with unexpected consequences. Iris, with her usual determination and patience, tried to convey the truth to them. She strove to explain that Theo carried no threat, that he was just like them, devoid of malice or desire to do harm, because he was just an ordinary man. However, the more she tried to allay their fears, the more distorted her message seemed, believing that he was the one who was not dangerous to Iris because she was so cool.